Okay, so we're going to go over the notes for part one, trapezoids. Now, before we go over the exercises, let's go over what a trapezoid is. So again, trapezoid has two bases, base one, base two, and these bases are parallel. Okay, so when you hear base in a trapezoid, that's the parallel. Those are the parallel sides. Okay. The legs on a trapezoid are the two opposite sides that are not parallel. So the non-parallel sides are called the legs. So basically, a trapezoid has two parallel sides and two non-parallel sides. And it's really important to remember that a trapezoid is not a parallelogram. Okay, it is not a parallelogram. Okay, so it has nothing to do with parallelograms, because in a parallelogram, both pairs of opposite sides are parallel, and in a trapezoid, only one pair of sides are parallel. The other two sides are not parallel. Okay, what is an isosceles trapezoid? In an isosceles trapezoid, the two legs are congruent. Okay, so that's one property of an isosceles trapezoid. Another property of an isosceles trapezoid is that the base angles, in other words, the two angles that are at the base, are congruent. Now, there's more than one pair. It's not just the two pairs at the bottom, it's also the two pairs up here that are congruent to each other. Okay, so both pairs of base angles are congruent. Okay, and once again, because we have parallel sides, okay, remember that, see, here's my transversal. The two angles that are inside, the consecutive angles right here, you're going to have a sum of 180. So these two add up to 180, and also on the other side, these guys add up to 180. In an isosceles trapezoid, the diagonals are also congruent, but unlike a parallelogram, so once again, a trapezoid is not a parallelogram. So unlike a parallelogram, the diagonals do not bisect each other. So as you can see, this piece right here is not congruent to that piece. Okay, they are not the same. However, it is congruent to this piece. So this triangle up here is isosceles. And similarly, the triangle down here, this triangle, is isosceles. So we have an isosceles triangle at the top and an isosceles triangle at the bottom. So these two pieces are congruent, okay? And these two pieces are congruent, okay? So for example, if I told you that this piece, this purple part, is 12, then you could conclude that this purple part is 12. And if I told you that the blue part was 3, then you can conclude that this blue part is 3. The diagonals are congruent, but they do not bisect each other, because if they did, you'd get a rectangle. You would not get an isosceles trapezoid. So the diagonals do not bisect each other, and that's another reason why a trapezoid is not a parallelogram. Additionally, in a trapezoid, um, if I draw a segment down the middle of that trapezoid, that segment is the average of the top segment and the bottom segment. So let's just make up some numbers. Let's say that this is 5 and this is 7. So what's in between 5 and 7? 6. So the distance from here to here is going to be 6. Let's make up another one. Let's say I have 10 and 15. Okay, what's going to be in the middle of 10 and 15? Now, if you can't do that in your head, then just find the average. 10 plus 15 divided by 2. So that's 25 over 2, and that's 12.5. Okay, so this middle segment is 12.5. Okay, and it's called a median, and it's also called a mid-segment, so you might see both of those words popping up. All right, and here's another example of how you would figure out the length of the mid-segment. All right, let's do some exercises. All right, here I am on number 1, and number 1 wants us to find the measure of angle D. Now, I know this is an isosceles trapezoid because right here it's telling me that AB is parallel to CD, so we have the opposite sides parallel. And over here, the two opposite sides that are not parallel are congruent. So I know that this is an isosceles trapezoid. And because I know that this is an isosceles trapezoid, I can label all of these angles. So right over here, these two are base angles. So I know that this is 125. And then the angles that are consecutive add up to 180 because we have parallel sides. So what's 180 minus 125? Well, that's 55. And therefore, the other base angle also has to be 55. Okay, so the question is, what's the measure of angle D? Measure of angle D is 55 degrees. Okay, here I am on number 2, and this time we have to find the measure of angle L. Now, first of all, again, I know that this is an isosceles trapezoid because it says here that the two legs are 5 each, so I can conclude that they are congruent. So even though it's not marked congruent, you know that they're congruent because their lengths are the same. So for the same reason, I can mark the base angles with the same degree measure. So here I have 40 because over here I have 40. And then these two have to add up to 180. So I know that this is 140, and therefore the other angle is 140 over here. So the two base angles have to be congruent. So measure of angle L is 140 degrees. For the next exercise, for 3 and 4, we are told that trapezoid HJKL has M and N at the midpoints of the legs. So M and N are midpoints of the legs. Okay, that's what they tell us. That means that segment MN is called a median or a mid-segment. Okay, and since we know that its length is in the middle of HJ and LK. All right, so that's what you have to think about as you do exercises 3 and 4. So here I am on number 3, and it says that HJ is 32 and LK is 60. Find MN. So we're looking for the length of MN. And remember, we know that M and N are midpoints, which means MN is a mid-segment. Now, if you can't do this in your head and just find the measure that's in the middle, all you need to do is find the average of the two numbers. So 32 plus 60 divided by 2. So that gives me 92 divided by 2, and that's 46. So Mn equals 46. Now, if you wanted to do a check, to see if your answer is correct, what you need to do is figure out whether 46 is the same distance away from 32 as it is from 60. So what you can do is 46 minus 32, that's the upper length, okay? And that gives me 14. And on the other end, 60 is the bigger length, and if I subtract 46, that also gives me 14. So that means that 46 is directly in between 32 and 60. So that's a good check if you want to make sure that your answer is correct. So that check. All right, here I am on number 4. If HJ is 18 and MN is 28, find LK. So lots of ways you can do this one. You can do the formula. You can do 18 plus, I'm just going to call this x down here. We know that 18 plus x divided by 2 is equal to 28, right? Because 28 is the average of the top and bottom side. And from there, we would multiply each side by 2 to get rid of that 2. Okay. And 18 plus x is therefore equal to 56. Okay. And then when you solve, x is equal to 38. Okay. Now, if you wanted to do this in your head, this one's actually really easy. Not all of them are easy, but what you can do is say, well, how far apart is 18 and 28? In other words, what's 28 minus 18? Well, their distance, they are 10 apart, which means that the same thing has to happen again. So 10 apart again would give me 28 plus 10, and that would give me 38. So x is equal to 38. So you can do it that way too. So notice that no matter which way I do it, I get 38. So here I am on number 5, and this question is asking us to find WT. Now WT is this little piece right here. So remember, in an isosceles trapezoid, diagonals are congruent. Now, how have I determined that this is an isosceles trapezoid? Well, I am seeing these markings right here, which means that opposite sides, one pair, are parallel. The non-congruent sides are, and the two sides that are not parallel are congruent. So that tells me that it's an isosceles trapezoid. So because I know it's an isosceles, I can conclude the diagonals are congruent. So once again, I'm looking for this WT piece right there. Okay, so I have ZX is 20, ZX, so that's this entire thing is 20. And I have TY is 15. Y is this piece right here, from here to here. That's 15, right? And I'm supposed to find WT. Now, remember that the diagonals are congruent. And because ZX is 20, that means that each diagonal is 20, okay? So if I know that ZX is 20, then I know that WY is also 20, okay? So if TY, which is a piece of it, is 15, then all I have to do is figure out what's left, and that's 5. So that tells me that WT, the piece that's left over, is 5, okay? And also that would tell me that this piece is 5 in case we needed it, and it would also tell me that that piece is 15, okay?